Hi everyone, Simon Jacobson here for another episode of Meaningful Live. What the stars say about you. Pisces. This program is dedicated in honor of and with gratitude of our good friend Rick Pug on his birthday. So we're entering into the next constellation, Pisces, which in ancient Latin means fish or fishes, two fish to be exact. So what does it tell us about ourselves, our personalities, our archetype? So we'll take a mystical look at it. The mystics explain that there are two types of souls. We'll call them amphibian souls and land souls. Water souls and land souls. What is the difference between water and land? We all know that beneath the water is plenty of land. There are mountains and valleys and earthquakes and volcanoes, species that are even more in number than on land. The difference is that they're concealed, they're covered up. They're covered up with water. So the mystics explain that the difference between the two, and they use this term, is that water refers to the hidden worlds, and land refers to the revealed worlds. A very basic example would be the difference between thought and speech. When you speak, your words are heard, they're articulated, they're expressed. Others can hear them. It's revealed. Your thoughts are yours and yours alone. There are words there as well, and there are ideas and letters. However, they're all concealed. They're submerged in the power and the energy of your thought, to the point that sometimes you don't even discern and recognize the distinct letters and words. Sometimes you can think in words, but regardless, it's concealed. So essentially, all the objects that exist in the water are submerged in another reality. So the fish in the sea represent creatures that are completely and always submerged, in a sense, sublimated in a reality beyond themselves, to the point that the fish can be even considered to be like water, like the world of thought. The world of speech, on the other hand, though we're dependent on oxygen, and we're also submerged within our oxygen, but it's not quite as obvious. We're walking entities, separate entities, and we've actually developed ways to lift ourselves above the ground through vehicles or other manners, where a fish can never separate itself from the sea. We can separate ourselves from land. We've gone to outer space. We can fly in an airplane. When I say land, I mean the earth, the ground. A fish cannot separate itself from its source, which is another distinction. 1 second that it leaves its life source. Its very life is dependent on it. So how is that representative in our own human psyches and our own souls? That one is a soul who's submerged in the spirit. Another expression, they say, we're not physical beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. Water souls are far more cognizant and aware of their spiritual nature. And they actually feel that they're from an ethereal other reality. And that's what they're submerged in. That doesn't mean there's no entity there, where there are actual fish in the sea. But the fish think of the psyche of a fish is completely submerged, completely dissolved and absorbed in something greater than itself. Land souls are also very spiritual, perhaps, but their focus is much more on their distinct identities. So you can say one is dissolved in something beyond, and one is its distinct identity, like the letters of speech, in contrast to the letters of thought. That's why you'll see people who are simply wired that way. They're wired to be more soulful, often poetic, romantic, some would even say naive, dreamers. And there are people who are much more practical. You can say street smart, grounded. This isn't a popularity contest, one better than the other. They both are necessary in this world. But Pisces represents that element. the fish personality. The ability also to be dissolved and absorbed in something beyond you. Some people's egos don't allow them to do that. And we're not talking about an unhealthy ego. Someone who's insecure and is loud and arrogant and aggressive simply to establish their presence. We're talking now in a healthy way. Some people, their identity is very individualistic and they don't easily assimilate and become absorbed in something beyond them. The truth is we all need it, but there are personality types that are more fish-like and there are personality types that are more land-like. The ultimate goal is bridging the two, and we discussed this in a previous episode of this series, in Aquarius. But here the focus is on the fish in the sea itself. So when we talk about the concept of being fish-like, indeed, it describes certain souls whose lives are like the fish in the sea. That's where they're immersed in. They're immersed in something that is often beyond the regular routine. But we have here two fish. So in some of the descriptions of the two fish, they talk about two fish swimming in opposite directions, somewhat reflecting the two poles of fantasy and reality. Sometimes you dream, but it has to be grounded in reality. Now that makes total sense when you think about it, because even the fish in the sea also need a certain element of grounding. However, when it comes to Pisces, it goes even further than that. It's associated with the attribute of joy. So you may have heard of the month in the Hebrew month of Adar, the month of joy. Now what is joy connected with water, with fish? Well, it's the same idea. And we'll look at it from a different angle. People say often, I'm just not wired to be a happy person. I'm just not joyous. How can you regulate joy? It's an emotion. And the answer is you don't regulate it. All of us have natural joy within us. Do you ever see a child, except under extenuating circumstances or something unnatural, that's unhappy? We're born happy because every soul is by nature like a fish in water. Because joy is the inherent state of our internal superconsciousness, which is like water. It's when we engage with land, when we engage with the forces and the elements of a land-like existence separate from our source, then that consciousness and self-consciousness is what creates the dissonance, which leads us to states that are not joyous and not happy. So joy, if you think about it, when a person is happy, there's no real sensation. We're not talking about necessarily dancing and celebrating. It's just an internal sense of contentment, a sense of joy. You feel you belong. You feel a seamlessness, like a fish in the water. When they say fish in water, everything is working so smoothly, seamlessly. When there's dissonance, there's a disconnect, that's much more in the revealed worlds, where the words can be disconnected from the ideas. So that's why fish in the sea so much are connected to that element of joy, the month of joy. One more point that's critical to make when you're talking about this is that fish are also being submerged. That's why you'll find in the Bible blessings that you should be as multiple as the fish in the sea. Why like the fish in the sea? So the Talmud tells us, because true blessings thrive, blossom, when they're not visible. When they're visible,